Stories about when did you realize you were wrong in your choice of wife as your husband? The story of when I became a third wheel. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect. He had a girlfriend he loved, with whom they spent many bright moments, sharing hobbies and dreams. But from the moment she got a dog named Bruno, their relationship began to take an unexpected turn. Bruno wasn't just a pet. He was a real star around whom the whole life of their little family revolved. Every evening they would gather on the couch, and instead of discussing the day's events or planning the weekend, conversations would drift to what the dog had done today, what tricks he'd learned, or how Bruno looked in his new toy. He tried to get closer to the girl, but every time he started to talk about his business, she was distracted by the dog playfully teasing Bruno or playing with him. He felt her attention drifting away, and it made him more and more unhappy. Soon his life resembled something like a comedy where he was playing a supporting role. For dinner, their plates were placed side by side, but Bruno actually sat between them, taking part in every conversation. Even during romantic evenings, they watched movies together with Bruno, with the dog nestled comfortably between them, so he couldn't even touch his beloved. By the time summer came, he realized that there were more and more places in their lives where the dog took center stage. They went to parks more often, not to spend time together, but to give Bruno a chance to run around. Instead of enjoying a summer day, they waited for hours for Bruno to finally get tired so they could go home. One day they had a movie night. He had already started preparing for this moment, but as always, things didn't go according to plan. All the preparation was useless when Bruno, upon seeing his favorite toy, jumped up and had a real coven all over the apartment. He didn't care that his owners were trying to concentrate on the movie. His loud barking and joyful jumping distracted everyone from the screen, and soon they couldn't hear a word. The next night, after all the chaos, she decided she'd rather sleep with Bruno. He stayed in their bedroom, feeling increasingly unwanted. In the morning, he found that he had slept on the floor and Bruno was on the bed, ensconced like a true king. At that moment, he realized that he had become the third extra in his own home. Story about the price tag of love. In the second year of their marriage, life seemed familiar and measured. They shared the usual joys, morning coffee, common dinners, and quiet evenings with their favorite movies. But at one point, this cozy world became subject to changes he didn't even know about. At first, it started with innocent questions. She began to wonder how much he earns. It was just a curious conversation, just like those days when they first started dating. But with each new question, he could feel the tension building. The questions became more and more specific. How much he made per month, how much went to taxes, what his bonuses were. He tried to take it as a show of concern, but a note of control slipped into her voice that alarmed him. One day, after another collection of his income data, he heard her comment, "You have to earn more so we can have a better life." That moment seemed to pierce him. The words reflected not only her expectations, but also his own fears. He began to realize that their relationship was becoming more financial than emotional. That alarm bell became a signal that something was wrong. Over the next few days, he noticed a new discussion in their normal life. She started talking about expensive things they could afford if his salary were larger. She mentioned a vacation on a tropical island, a new car, a house overlooking the ocean. Images appeared in his mind. They were leaving their cozy little home and moving into a luxurious mansion, which even in his dreams seemed unattainable. Gradually, he began to pay more attention to his expenses. Every time they went to the store, he could feel her eyes scanning the price tags. She chose only the most expensive products, pointing at them as if their costs spoke volumes about their quality. He began to realize that her interest in money was becoming more obsessive by the day. The former carelessness had vanished, and in its place there was a vain eagerness for material prosperity. As a result, the work that used to bring him pleasure became a source of stress. Story about different roads. After much discussion and preparation, they finally had a long-awaited baby in their lives. That moment when they held their baby in their arms for the first time seemed to be the pinnacle of happiness. He looked into his wife's eyes and saw joy, hope, and dreams of the future there. Their lives were about to become fuller, more fulfilling. They dreamed of walks in the park, of family holidays, and of teaching their child important life lessons. But soon the rosy expectations began to dissipate. With each day that passed after the baby was born, his wife became more and more distant. At first, he didn't pay much attention to it. The difficult nights, sleepless hours, and uncertainty of the first few months of motherhood could all take their toll on her. He tried to support her, help her, and share the responsibilities of caring for the baby, but it soon became apparent that something more was going on. She began to wallow in herself, refusing to socialize and secluding herself in her room for long hours. Where before they had planned future trips together and picked out the baby's toys, now he was left alone with his own thoughts and worries. The baby demanded a lot of attention, and although he gave himself fully to the process, he felt that something was missing. He began to notice how her attitude toward everything had changed. Whereas before they had happily discussed every detail of life related to the new member of the family, now the conversations had been reduced to necessary matters. She stopped showing interest in how his day was going, how he was feeling. The spark in her eyes that had once made them close was gone. The story about impossible happiness. When he first met her, he was enchanted. Her laughter sounded like music, and her eyes sparkled with life and passion. Their relationship deepened each day, and he couldn't help but think he had found the one he would share his life with. But as time passed, he began to notice the darker side of her nature. The jealousy and selfishness that seemed to grow with their love. In the beginning, everything seemed serene. They shared many moments of happiness, evening walks, laughing until tears, dreaming of the future. He supported her in her endeavors, while she was always looking for reasons to be unhappy. Every time he shared his successes with her, she reacted not with joy, but with rebuke. More often than not, her words sounded like, "Why you and not me?" It was a small but sharp reminder that his joy could not be complete. At first, he had tried to ignore these moments, hoping that time would help her grow up. He believed that she would be able to overcome her envy, and in time she would become a support rather than an obstacle in his life. However, with each new success, each new opportunity, he felt her envy creeping into their relationship more and more. One day, he received a tempting job offer that promised not only career advancement, but also a significant salary increase. It was an opportunity he had long dreamed of. However, when he got home, his heart was pounding with anxiety. He realized that he had to decide how to break the news to his partner. He knew that this news would stir up a storm of emotion in her, and he didn't want to burden her with his happiness. That night, he began to hide the details of his success. He told her the work was progressing, but avoided the details. A feeling of guilt arose inside him for not being able to share this joy. He hoped he could tell her the whole truth soon, when he was sure she would take it positively. But the more he kept silent, the more the guilt grew. He began to realize that hiding good news was becoming his habit. Every time he was faced with a situation where he could have rejoiced, he would stop so as not to upset her. It became a real game of hide and seek. He hid his life, his accomplishments, as if they were something shameful. Several months passed, and the situation did not change. He continued to work on his project, while she, in turn, wallowed in her own failures and resentments. Each of her reactions to his news became more and more predictable and humiliating. Time and time again, he found himself unable to afford to be happy around her. One night, when they were at a party, he noticed his acquaintances sharing news of their successes. He felt a surge of joy when one of his friends talked about their new home. He looked at those around him and realized that their laughter was genuine, their joy real. And in that moment, he felt again the difference between his life and theirs. He stood there, full of envy, and realized that her envy could no longer be a hindrance to him. Story about chains of debt. After the wedding, the world seemed perfect. They had just started their life together, and romance was in the air. He looked forward to them becoming a real family. Their dreams were full of bright colors, and they planned trips together, cozy evenings, and more. However, soon after the hopeful celebration, his life began to sink into dark shadows. The first alarm bells came when it was time to pay the bills. He noticed that some amounts were higher than expected. Each month, funds would arrive on the shared card but would suddenly disappear quickly. He tried to ignore it. After all, the wedding was expensive, and the expenses were understandable. However, it soon became clear that it wasn't just a fluke. Each week, he noticed more and more incomprehensible spending. She kept buying new clothes, jewelry, furnishings. Each week he found something new in the house that he didn't remember discussing or planning. Something inside him began to nauseate, but he tried to talk himself into thinking it was all within the realm of normal. Perhaps she just wanted to decorate their new home, and it was part of their life together. However, everything changed when the first debt notice arrived. He opened the mailbox and found a letter there informing him of unpaid loans that shocked him. All these amounts added up to a huge debt that she had never mentioned. He felt a chill run down his back. His heart beat faster, and he realized that his quiet life was not so serene. That night, he studied every account that might clarify the situation. Each new document he found only increased his anxiety. Credit card debts, car loans, unpaid service bills, all of it gradually accumulated, forming a veil of secrecy that she tried in vain to hide. His mind refused to accept this reality. How could she go so deep into debt and not tell him? Every month he paid off her debts, hoping that with each payment they could start a new life. However, instead of learning from her mistakes, she kept spending money on new things. This became a real test of his patience. He worked overtime to cover all the expenses, and every time he returned home, he felt that his efforts went unnoticed. He realized it was a vicious circle. The monthly loan payments seemed endless. He began to think more and more often that if she didn't change her attitude toward finances, their lives would be plunged into debt. Every time he tried to talk about financial planning, she brushed it off, claiming she had it all under control. But at the same time, her shopping was getting crazier and crazier. One day, he came home with the intention of discussing their financial situation. He was setting himself up for a serious conversation, but he saw her with a bag of new purchases. She was laughing and pretending it was just normal stuff. At that moment, he felt his heart clench with disappointment. He looked at the bills again and realized that their future depended on her willingness to change her behavior. At that moment, his hope began to fade. With each new month, his moral strength was draining. He began to keep an account of his expenses, but she showed no interest in doing so. All her excuses sounded more and more implausible. He could no longer hide his feelings, but he also realized that accusations wouldn't change anything. He was beginning to realize that their relationship was being tested not only financially, but emotionally as well. He could see how her unwillingness to compromise was only making the situation worse. Over time, he stopped reacting to her purchases. Every time she brought home another trinket, he just kept silent, trying to keep the peace in the house. He realized that it wasn't normal to live like this. He began to avoid talking about money and didn't want to discuss it. Instead, he tried to concentrate on work, forgetting about home life. But this state of affairs could not go on forever. One day, when he checked their joint account, he saw that his salary did not cover even the minimum payments. He realized it was time to make a difficult decision. He began researching how he could turn things around, from going to financial institutions to working with counselors. But at the same time, he realized that it would require effort on his part, which might not be easy. Meanwhile, he continued to analyze his feelings. He didn't know how her behavior was affecting their relationship and their future. He also realized that his own life could not be completely tied to her decisions. He had to find a path to his independence so he wouldn't be stuck in this financial nightmare. Story about words are like a knife. We were in the bathroom with a warm stream of water flowing from the shower and the air filled with the scent of shower gel. We were getting ready for our friend's wedding, and I was feeling great that morning. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The suit fit perfectly, emphasizing all the advantages. I was in the best shape of my life, and it gave me confidence. She stood in front of the mirror, finishing her makeup. Her hair was neatly gathered, and the light makeup emphasized her natural beauty. I couldn't help but notice how stunning she looked, and I couldn't resist telling her so. I expected her to respond with something nice, as it usually happens between loving people, but instead a look of indifference appeared on her face. She continued to carefully apply her mascara without turning around. It got me thinking. I remembered that in all the time we'd been together, not once had she ever once complimented me on how I looked. I tried to remember at least one time when she'd remarked that I was dressed well or that I had good hair, but I was failing. And that's when it hit me. This small but important aspect of our relationship had become suddenly weighty. I didn't know how long it had been bothering me, but in that moment I decided it was time to talk about it. I said to her, "You know, I always tell you how beautiful you are and how much I like you, but I don't remember you ever saying that I'm good looking or that I'm handsome." She paused for a moment, setting her mascara aside, and rolled her eyes with disdain. I felt the tension in the air rise. My words didn't seem to move her at all, but rather irritated her. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the possible conflict that seemed to be brewing. Then I may have made the mistake of asking the question that had been on my tongue. "Do you find me attractive at all?" I asked, knowing that this question could lead to a tense conversation. I felt something inside me clench with anxiety. Her response could be critical, and doubts surfaced in my mind. She turned to me with an expressive face full of bewilderment. "I didn't think it was important," she replied, as if her thoughts were in some other world where questions about appearance didn't matter. That phrase stunned me. I had expected our relationship to be based on mutual respect and consideration, but her response exposed the emptiness in our interaction. Story about she hated my family. Before the wedding, she openly told me that she didn't like my mom. I took it as a temporary disagreement, a character mismatch that time would fix. At that moment, it seemed to me that love and family was something we would be able to unite. I was sure that things would fall into place after the wedding, and she would be able to accept my parents just as I accepted her family. But every day I noticed that she was shying away from communicating with them more and more. At first, it was subtle, refusing to go out with them, postponing meetings indefinitely, making excuses like, "Today wasn't a good day." I didn't want to get into this situation, hoping that her dislike would fade away once we became a full-fledged family. After the wedding, the tension began to build. Every time the holidays approached, I could feel the discomfort in the air. She talked more and more about how much she disliked family gatherings. I was surprised. The holidays were an important part of our culture, and I couldn't understand how she could dismiss them so easily. But deep down, I tried to be understanding. After all, she was my wife, and I wanted her to feel comfortable. However, shortly after our son was born, it became clear that it wasn't that simple. On the day of his first birthday, when the whole family was planning to get together, she announced that she didn't want my parents to come. This was a shock to me. I had hoped that they would be able to share this important moment with us, but her stubbornness showed me that I was caught between two fires in this situation. I remember looking at our little family that day. My son was full of joy, and I had conflicting feelings. I didn't want him to grow up in an atmosphere of hate and resentment. I remembered how my mom always supported me and was there for me in times of need. I felt she would have been the perfect example for our son, but her absence meant that part of our family wouldn't be there for an important event. Each time she avoided seeing my parents, I could feel the gap between us growing. I began to notice that with each time she refused to attend family gatherings, I was losing not only my connection with my parents, but also my confidence in our union. I began to question what was really behind her dislike. Maybe it was just personal preference, or maybe she couldn't accept the fact that I had a family that was important to me. Her negative attitude toward my parents had an impact not only on family gatherings, but also on our daily interactions. I began to feel isolated. I wanted to share joys and sadnesses with her, but her unwillingness to open up to me led to constant internal conflict. I was confused, not knowing how to influence the situation or how to help her realize that our family needed to be together. Every time my parents offered to come visit or spend the weekend with us, I found myself trapped between two worlds. I didn't want to offend her or my parents, and each time I found it harder and harder to explain explain why we couldn't get together. I felt like a traitor to my folks, as they had put a lot of work into raising and supporting us. Despite this, I kept hoping that things would change with time. I dreamed that one day we would be able to come together as a real family and see our son grow up surrounded by loved ones. But my dreams seemed to collide with a reality that was out of my control.